May we pray. Now, O Lord, take these lips and speak through them. Take all of our minds and think through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire with love for you. For it's in Jesus we pray. Amen. Our text this morning seems to be about conflict. The earlier text read from James reminded us just where conflict is birthed. In our text from Jesus, we see just how conflict is eradicated. Disagreements, arguments, squabbles, discord, disputes, tension, controversy, fracas. Well, it seems to surround us all. It seems to be in the very air that we breathe and in the water that we drink. Its thunder is heard from Laurus to Lebanon. Its acid burns lives from Aner to Algiers. Its rancid odor saturates the wind from Myrtle Beach to Madrid. It feels like an angry, emotional tsunami building every day, flooding lives and destroying lives all around the world. And it appears that even those things that should bring peace create more harm. Religion. Watch the nightly news. We see this religion destroying that religion. And then add to that politics and economic systems and closed-minded cultures, and the world seems to be a complete mess. And sometimes, as a way of dealing with this mess, we retreat into our homes and piously say, why can't they all just get along? I said that is pious because it assumes that we good church people, as opposed to they, other religions and non-church folk, are getting along. And for what I read in the newspapers, that's not true either. The only difference, as I see it, is we good, decent church people don't usually take weapons and shoot people. We just assassinate their character with our tongue. Sigmund Freud, I affectionately call him Ziggy, after the comic strip, the father of modern psychoanalysis, believed that human beings, by their very nature, are in conflict. He believed that there were three parts of the human mind. There was the id that houses all of our instinctive impulses, fight or flight, and on and on and on. And then there's the ego, and that's the need for self-importance. And then there is the superego, and that's the ego that receives all the rules and regulations and mores of society that we rebel against. And these three things inside of us are constantly at war. All three are at battle for domination. Thus, we're in constant conflict with our society. We're in conflict with our own culture. We're in conflict with religious restraint. We struggle with accountability and with responsibility and any form of authority. And he said, ultimately, listen to this. He said ultimately, human beings want what they do not have. We want what we do not have. Let me say that again. Human beings want what they do not have. And that becomes a primary concern. And therein lies the genesis of most of our conflicts. Our primordial parents in that beautiful garden had everything they needed, but they wanted one thing more. They wanted what they did not have. And sin entered the world, and it's been passed along from generation to generation. Therein lies the source of conflict, whether it be international or national or regional, locally, or even in our homes. It's the source of conflict not only in the physical world, it's the source of conflict in the spiritual world as well. And from my point of view at least, it's also in the Christian church. But not just in laity, it's also in clergy. We want what we do not have. For some, that's stuff. Some nations and some individuals want what they do not have, and they don't want others to have it either. Especially if they don't have it and somebody else does, they're going to try to take it from them. They want to take it, whether the door is locked or unlocked, or they'll do it with a tank or a weapon. For some, that which they seek is notoriety, to be famous. For some, it may even be to be infamous. Some hunger for power and control. For some, they yearn for wealth. But at the heart of every squabble, whether it be nations or communities or in church parlors, this is a character flaw, and it's always at play. Now let me sharpen the point just a little further. At the heart of a soul which is driven in need by want, it is an insecure soul, usually also a wounded soul, a soul that feels unworthy, a soul that feels it has little value. So it wants that one thing it does not have, and it thinks if it gets it, then all those issues, all those things, all those shortcomings are going to be answered, going to be fulfilled. The need is not as deadly as some country seeking an atomic bomb to be respected on the world stage like North Korea and Iran, nor as small as a family member always demanding their way in the home, or a coworker in the workplace, or in a Sunday school class. Sometimes, oftentimes, most of the time, on our climb to get what we do not have, we hurt those people closest to us, and usually we hurt those who love us the most. That's what happened to Dennis Clary. He was a politician up in Connecticut, well-respected politician, and he wanted to be a senator. And he ran a very good campaign, and people were flocking to him. But he settled an estate that the family thought was not fair. And they began taking out newspaper ads all over the state of Connecticut. And the ad was very simple. It read, "We're tired of Dennis. Are you?" His closest relatives signed. He lost the election. We want what we do not have. Sometimes, to get what we do not have, we alienate all those around us. And there was a story about a man on an Amtrak train, and he's sitting on the right side of the aisleway, and there were two women on his left side sitting there arguing the whole way. And it seems the one closest to the window did not want to let the window down, and the one sitting on the aisle wanted the window down. The one on the aisle said, "If you don't put the window down, I'm going to die of heat exhaustion." And the one sitting next to the window said, if I put this window down, I'm going to die of pneumonia. And the argument just kept on and on and louder it got. And finally, when the porter came by, this man, this long-suffering man over here on the other side, stopped the porter, says, look, I've got a solution. Let that window down, and then she'll die of pneumonia. Put it up, and then she'll die of heat stroke, and then we'll have peace. We want what we do not have. We also do not want others to have what we don't have. When nations play that game, it can be absolutely ridiculous. And I'm reminded of the Christ of the Andes when it was erected between Argentina and Chile. The people were ecstatic. There was some bad blood between Argentina and Chile, and so the statue was put there on the border. And everybody celebrated and said, as long as that statue is there, there's going to be peace and tranquility between our nations. And then someone in Chile noticed that the Christ statue faced Argentina. The back of Christ was towards Chile, and they got upset. And there was rioting in the streets until one politician said, oh, no. Think of it this way. Argentina needs to be watched more over than Chile. And everybody went back to peace again. Are not most wars started over one nation wanting what another nation has? Or one nation wants to make another nation just like them, socially, politically, and spiritually? More times than not, I'm afraid. Because we want what we do not have. Maybe we possessed it one time and then lost it. You know, handsome figure, nice looks, hair that had no gray, hair, memory. Maybe we lost a social status. Maybe there was a time when people came to ask us important questions. Maybe people admired us in the marketplace. Maybe we commanded respect and admiration. And now we have it no longer, and we want what we do not have. It might be a dream, it may be a goal, it may be a possession, maybe it's a special car. Maybe it's a house in a particular place. Maybe it's a specific title or some job. Sometimes it's an unrealized goal, and sometimes that which we do not have may become an obsession for us. And our entire life gets driven, consumed by that which we do not have. Sometimes that search is for approval. We didn't get it when we were young. And now we're spending our adult life trying to get it from our peers. And usually that doesn't come. I remember Nancy loved playing soccer. She said the only thing about it she didn't like was all the running. But I remember watching her play one day. She was 8 or 9 years old, and I was standing there leaning on the chain link fence. And when the game was over, I was amazed that the children didn't know who won or who lost. They didn't know what the score was. You know, it was really neat watching. They just tried to play as hard as they could. And they started filing out through the gate, and there was one little fella. I looked down at him. I said, "Ford, you are a really good soccer player." Now, my mistake was I said that in earshot of the rest of the team. And Ford said, "Thank you." But then the little girl behind Ford said, "I'm the best kicker." And I said, "Yeah, you probably are." And the one behind her said, "I'm the best runner." And it went on and on and on. Everyone was telling me what they were good at doing. And I thought, these coaches were really good at affirming their players, you know. But they were looking for approval. But at the last one little girl, she looked like Peppermint Patty from a Charlie Brown cartoon strip. Her hair was standing straight up, and she was dirty, and she had been rolling around in some grass. And I looked at her, and I said, "Now, what are you good at doing?" She went like this. She smiled real big, and she said, "I don't know, but my mom says I'm the biggest pain." Well, one day, One day in first century Palestine, a teacher sat in the circle of his students, and as he took a child and placed her in his lap, he used that child as a sermon illustration on being first and being last. And you have to remember, children in first century Palestine were expendable. They were worthless. They were a liability. You feed them and they die. You feed the little girls and they get married and go away. You know, they were a liability. So nobody put a lot of value into children. And interesting enough, in the Aramaic language, the same word for children and servant the word for children and servant is the same. The servant, however, had more value than the child. At this time in their spiritual lives, these disciples were still very self-focused. They're very self-serving. They left their families and their children behind to follow this Galilean carpenter, and they're wanting some payback. They want to be affirmed. They want somebody to say, "That a boy." And they begin arguing on their way to Capernaum on who is the greatest in the disciple gang. And I imagine Peter said, "Well, I catch the biggest fish." And I imagine John said something like, "Well, I'm closer to him than you." And on the game was played out. And when they get to Capernaum, Jesus says, "What are you arguing about?" He knows. What were you arguing about on the way? And then they have to fess up. You know, we like approval. We like to be celebrated. For us humans, being second is not good enough. Few remember vice presidents, do we? We don't remember vice presidents all that much because they're the second one. We don't remember who came in second for the national championships, whether it's basketball or football or baseball. We just don't remember second place. Second place is not great. Second place is not important. The world tells us if we want to be great, then we have to have a lot of wealth, and we have to command broad praise, and we have to have tremendous power, and have as much control about things as possible. Get the applause of your field. Get the standing ovation. Score the most runs and touchdowns and win that championship game, and we'll follow you anywhere. We'll celebrate you. We'll applaud your way. Yes, we want what we do not have. Now, the problem is, the world says to us one thing that makes us great, which is all that applause and stuff and things. And Jesus tells us something entirely different. You see, in Jesus' eyes, it's not how much you get that makes you great. What makes you great is how much you give. Greatness in God's kingdom is being selfless. It's being unselfish. Do you want to be great? Do you want to be great? It's an easy question. Do you want to be great? Really? Really? What does Jesus says, if you want to be great, then you be a servant to all. Reminds me of a little story of a boy who went to a ice cream parlor. Young fella, could not see over the table. And he looks up at the server and he says, "How much for a brownie and a scoop of ice cream?" And the server barks at him and says, $1. And the little fella backs up, and he could see him counting his money. And he said, "Well, how much for a scoop of ice cream in a cup?" He said, "What flavor?" "Well, I like chocolate." 75 cents. And the server goes over and gets a scoop of ice cream, throws it in the cup, slaps it down unceremonially on the counter, and turns to wait on the adult. And after waiting on the adult, he looks back down on the counter, and what he saw literally broke his heart and changed his heart at the same time. There on the counter was 75 cents and a 25-cent tip. The child knew if he got the brownie and ice cream, there wouldn't be enough for a tip. So he sacrificed so the server might get a tip. Do you want to be great? When Yodo Full Gospel Church was formed in South Korea, it had a building program. And the pastor tried to get that church off the ground, but he couldn't raise the funds to erect the walls. And it was almost at the point where Pastor Cho was ready to give up. And then something marvelous happened in the middle of a service. Now, I promise you, this is not a stewardship sermon. But in the middle of the service, this little woman walked in with a torn dress and calloused feet and arthritic fingers. And she placed down front on the altar an old bowl and chopsticks. It was all that she owned. She gave everything to that church so it might succeed. And when the church realized what she had done, it spilled over into the lives of the other congregants, into the other members. And each one started unselfishly and selflessly coming forward and giving of themselves. And now that church has 20,000 members. Do you want to be great? It was the evening of February the 2nd, 1943, and the U.S. Army transport ship Dorchester was crowded to capacity. It was on its way to Europe. And if you remember at this time, the late 1944, the Atlantic waters were filled with U-boats. And the captain had warned all the personnel on board about that. So he told the passengers, when you sleep in your berth, always wear your life preserver. But it was hot down there. And there were a lot of these soldiers didn't listen. And an hour and a half from port, U-boat 223 surfaced. Well, it came up enough to put its spyglass on the ship, the Dorchester. One torpedo was fired, and it hit the Dorchester midship. In 20 minutes, it would sink. And the men were in panic. The lifeboats were being filled. And the waters were icy cold, Titanic-type cold. And they knew if they went in the water, they were going to die. So they wanted to get in these boats, these lifeboats. And people were jumping from the deck into the boats as they were being lowered. And sometimes it nearly capsized the lifeboat as the people jumped in. Well, there were 4 chaplains on board. One was a Methodist, one was Jewish, one was Roman Catholic, and then one was Dutch Reformed. And these 4 chaplains just dispersed themselves on the ship, trying to calm these men down. And the men who had gone down to sleep and not worn their life vests were now on top deck asking for a life vest. And so these chaplains broke open a door, and there were life vests in there, and they gave every one of them away and didn't keep one for themselves. Neither did the Methodists say, okay, all you who are Methodists, get in this line, here's your vest. Neither did the rabbi say, okay, all you Jews, get in this line, here's your vest. And the priest didn't say that, and the Dutch Reform minister didn't say that. It was dispersed unilaterally. There was one scene where a man who wanted to go back down in the belly of that ship and get some gloves. And the rabbi stopped him and says, look, you don't need to go down there. You're going to die if you go back down there. Here's some gloves. I got extra, and gave him the gloves. And only when he was in the lifeboat did he realize the rabbi wasn't going to need them. They were the only gloves he had. And the last scene that these survivors of the Worcester saw was those 4 chaplains standing there on the deck of that ship. A Methodist, a Roman Catholic, a Jew, and a Dutch Reformed. Standing there arm in arm, singing and praying as they went underwater. Carl Sandburg said, "Valor is a gift. Those having it never know for sure whether they have it until the test comes." And that night, Chaplains Fox and Good and Poling and Washington passed life's ultimate test. And in doing so, they became an enduring example of extraordinary faith and courage and selflessness. Do you want to be great? Do you still want to be great? Sometimes chopsticks and a bowl. Sometimes, like a fireman or a soldier or a policeman or a neighbor, it's laying down your life for the life of another. Do you want to be great? If you do, put on Christ's apron and be a servant to the world. Lay down your life on his cross in ministry and mission. Do that and hear God say, when the curtain is pulled on our life, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Do you want to be great? Amen.